All right, so first off, everybody, thank you so much for your patience as Lincoln is figuring out kind of what's going on with all of this stuff. Um, we'll probably be waiting for other students to join us throughout the class as they kind of figure out where we're at. So luckily we're recording this, so if anybody misses it, you can go back and watch it. If you guys know of anybody that should be here that isn't, by all means let them know. We have moved. We have moved now twice since our lovely biology lab last class. First, we were sent to an office, and now we're in 308. So again, thank you for your patience. And then for those of you who are in my online sections, they apparently created multiple online sections, and they have rolled all of you up into one. So you may notice that the section you were in was either PSC 203-91 or 93. Now everybody's in -92. So this is kind of typical. It happens somewhat frequently that we just kind of move things around. No big deal, nothing to worry about. If you have any concerns, please call me, see me after class, anything like that. Other than that, there have been some hiccups with getting things published because Canvas has been moving everything. So if you guys can't get a hold of anything that you need, by all means, shout out to me. I've had some students who've already been like, hey, I can't find this, and it's just been a little migration issue that we've been able to fix. So for those of you in here, are you guys able to get everything you need from Canvas so far? Hearing nobody say no, I'm going to assume you can. The other thing I want to briefly talk about is apparently on the book it asks for like a student section ID or something. I don't have any idea what that is, so we're obviously not going to use it. It says you put it in if your instructor has assigned it, otherwise leave it blank. So just leave it blank. You don't have to put anything in there. You could put something in there. I don't really know what it does, but I don't care. I just need you to read the book. Any questions about what we covered last class before we hop into today's information? Sweet. Now cross your fingers that this works, because this is my first time using this particular setup in here. And every single Lincoln room is just a little bit different. Yep, just as I suspected. It wants me to be on the right Wi-Fi network. Okay, I'm not going to waste time with this. I'll just post the thing for you guys next class as well, or the PowerPoint. It only had like 5 slides anyway. All right, today is going to be all about controversy, basically. And the reason for that is we talked about the 3 major components of what a democracy is. And before we kind of jump into that, I want to define a couple of key terms. We hear all the time in the United States that we have a democracy. Isn't that awesome? Here's a surprise, we don't. We do and we don't. We have what's called a republic. And it's a representative democracy. We have where we elect the people that are going to ultimately get to make laws and stuff like that. In a true democracy, we really only kind of saw that in like ancient Greece. Like Athens, for example, was ruled by a true democracy where every citizen had a vote and basically could contribute to the outcome of any decision. Now, the term citizen was very loosely defined. I'm sorry, very strictly defined to mean basically landowning white men. I'm sorry, it's Greece, so not necessarily white men, but you get what I mean, like the aristocracy sort of thing. The people who had enough wealth to have land. There were slaves, there were peasants, for lack of a better word. Women obviously didn't get to vote. It was basically the ruling elite. That doesn't really work when you get to a bigger scale like the United States. We simply have too many people for everybody to get to contribute on every single decision. So we have this republic where we get a say in it by various different mechanisms, but we don't get to directly go and say, hey, we want to raise taxes or we want to lower taxes. Instead, we're going to elect the people who we think are going to do that for us. But let's talk about this whole concept of, this is the wrong day's notes. So let's talk about this whole concept of what this controversy is we're talking about. Democracy basically, and again, the way our republic is set up is it's organized disagreement. We have this conflict, we want to get to a compromise, and we have these institutions to help us reach that goal. How many people in here have a boyfriend, girlfriend, wife, husband? How do you guys handle your fights? Do you have a mechanism you follow every single time with like, this is what we are going to do to work this out? Probably not. I've been married to my spouse for a little bit over a decade. We've been together since I was a sophomore in since I was a junior in undergrad. We've had lots of fights. It goes differently every single time. But if we were able to set a framework, if we were able to say, here's how we're going to work through this, it would be a lot more likely that our fights wouldn't be that big of a deal. Everybody fights. Everybody has things they want different. How we handle that, how we work through it, that's the beauty of how our government's set up. Our learning topics for today, well, what I really want you to walk away with is I want you to explain why conflict is normal and necessary in a democracy. Distinguish between preferences, institutions, and outcomes, and use a simple framework, to analyze political disagreements without basically becoming team sports. You know, one of the things we'll learn about when we read when we look at the Federalist Papers is that this whole concept of having a two-party system was not what was intended for our country. Nobody thought it was going to happen this way. Well, I'm sorry, the Anti-Federalists thought it would certainly happen this way. The Federalists argued we have far too many differences to get to that point. The point is that rather than looking at a political issue through the lens of, well, my group likes this, or my group likes that, I want you guys to be able to kind of recognize where different opinions come into that and see both sides of an issue. So, in one sentence, can you guys remind me from last time, what is politics? I know it's early, just shout something out.
Organization of arguments.
Exactly, that works. And then, do you remember what makes something political?
Two opposing sides.
Just a different thing.
Yeah, politics is how we resolve it. So you have that conflict, and you have some mechanism of resolving it. So now, why conflict is unavoidable. People are going to disagree about everything. And you guys ought to have seen this by now in your lives. And I'm going to confess my naivete. When I was young, I thought, hey, if we could just use logic and reason and everything, everybody's going to come to the same conclusion at some point. But that's not going to actually happen. And the book does a great job of identifying 3 key reasons why everybody's always going to have different ideas. And the first is difference in values. One of the things we hear a lot about with the elections going on and stuff are value-based issues. In fact, we have candidates who kind of solely run or are solely supported by different groups because of the values they have. If you think about abortion as one of the key examples of this, because many different denominations of Christianity believe that it is immoral to have abortions, they typically tend to support candidates that also oppose abortions. And so this would be an idea of a value-based judgment. So if I'm a person who believes this one thing super strongly, I might be searching for candidates that also believe that thing super strongly. I told you guys last time I have a condition called albinism, super awesome white hair, not so great vision. One thing I care about is, and my kids all have the same thing. One thing I care about is candidates that are going to be cool with rights for everyone, or at the very least not taking rights away and making things harder for people, right? Does that make me liberal? Sometimes. Does that make me conservative? Sometimes. It really depends on the person for me. And like I said, I'm going to try hard not to give you too much of, I'm not going to tell you how to believe, so you can disagree with me on that. The next is differences in ethnicity or origin. This is massive because while we don't typically, while it's kind of, it's kind of difficult to say that, all Black people vote a certain way or all Latino people vote a certain way. We have lots of data to say that as a group, different ethnicities tend to support one side or the other. So, for example, and let me ask you guys this really quick, and I do this every year because I want to use whatever the best language is. And so it's come time to say African American or Black. What is it right now? Black. Anybody disagree with that? Sweet. That's what it's been for like the last 3 or 4 years, but before that it was African American. And like I said, I want to use the right terminology. When I was a public defender, if you guys have, for those of you who have grown up in Jefferson City, there's some HUD housing, kind of like on Elizabeth Street and stuff. If you don't, nobody knows where they actually live when you're an indigent client. They kind of know the name for the region. And so if I didn't use the right names, then people thought I was insane. The same thing with sentencing. So when I would go down to the jail and talk to somebody, if I said, hey, they're offering 5 years concurrent with your other cases, they'd be like, what does that mean? I have no idea. Or consecutive. So they're offering 3 years and 3 years consecutive. They'd be like, no idea what that means. So I'd have to use the prison term running wild to explain the difference. So they're offering 3 and 3 running wild, or they're offering 5 years not running wild. And running wild just means that you're going to do your 3 years, and then you're going to do 3 more years on top of that. That's consecutive. But not running wild means concurrent. You're going to do your 3 years and your other 3 years at the same time. So I always like to make sure I'm up on whatever the current vocabulary is. I don't have that much riz because I have to ask the questions. But I try to throw in a little bit of what I call Zoomerisms. Because if it's boomerisms, then Gen Z's Zoomerisms. So ethnicity is a predictor. And a big part of this is the groups that tend to, the political parties that tend to support the things that that particular group might care about. And famously in the last election, we saw a massive shift of Hispanic Americans move from traditionally supporting liberals to supporting conservatives. That was, all the commentators say that's in large part because of a massive social media push. But traditionally, ethnicity is a good predictor of why people might vote. All of these things kind of have gray areas too, because of the values somebody has might be largely based on their ethnicity, or their ethnicity might kind of funnel into what the values are. Finally, we have ideology. And rather than values, this is kind of who you identify with. And for a lot of people, they 100% identify with a political party. A lot of times this comes from how you grew up. There's a really interesting book that was written by one of my law school professors called Red Families and Blue Families. And basically what they did in this book is they looked at all of the different predictors of what you would later go on to identify as a Republican or a Democrat. And their conclusion was that almost across the board, it was what your parents were. And I might use this term coming up throughout the semester. And so I'll tell you, one of the most interesting things I've ever heard is the term yellow dog Republican or yellow dog Democrat. Does anybody know what that means? I had no idea what it meant when I first heard it. And basically what this means is that you are so Republican that you would vote for and it kind of comes from the South, so I'm going to say yellow dog, and I think that means like cowardly animal. You would vote for a yellow dog if they were Republican. And for some people, that political identification, what they believe in, what they think they stand for, is tied 100% to that name. And it certainly makes it easy. And this is why I want to take a quick segue from what the book talks about. And they do talk about it in chapter 1. I definitely encourage you to read that last section. How we consume political ideas is terribly important. And the reason it's terribly important is because we have kind of, within the last 15 to 20 years, moved to a society where your ideology is going to be fed to you every chance you get, right? If you watch certain YouTube videos, it's going to start building up the algorithm to where it's going to continue serving you similar YouTube videos. If you are on Facebook, it's going to do the same thing. Hopefully this isn't news to anybody. There's a documentary all about this called The Social Dilemma. I highly encourage you to watch it. But it's about how basically social media was the fuel on the fire that led to the whole QAnon movement, which you guys may be too young to know about. That was a little while ago now. But basically, we have the ability to, well, not me, but big business has the ability to kind of control what you're consuming. And because of that, you can get stuck in an echo chamber. You can get stuck in a group of people that are going to tell you exactly what you want to hear all the time. And that may or may not be what's real. So for example, one thing I really like to do is, on like an election night, is flip back and forth between CNN and Fox News and hear the different ways that they're talking about the exact same thing. A piece of evidence comes in and Fox News is like, this is fantastic for Republicans, and CNN is like, this is fantastic for Democrats, and it's like, how can it be both ways? But I think the starkest example of why we have to be careful with political information is this. During President Trump's first campaign, man, this was a long time ago. What was I doing? I remember reading an article about how the Pope calls Donald Trump accuses the Pope of not being Christian. And I was aghast. I'm like, Jesus Christ. If anybody is Christian, it's got to be the Pope, right? So I read the article, and sure enough, in it, there's a quote of Donald Trump saying, well, I don't think the Pope's a very good Christian, blah, 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 blah. And as you continue reading, in the context of why he said this is because Donald Trump was responding to an article from CNN wherein the Pope accused him of not being a Christian. I'm like, well, that doesn't sound very much like anything a Pope would do, so let's figure this out. So I found the first article. The first article, sure enough, says that in a sermon in, I think, Rio, the Pope said that Donald Trump isn't a Christian. I'm like, that again, that doesn't sound like the Pope, especially during a sermon. Don't deny communion, maybe. Straight up call someone out in the middle of a sermon? Probably not. So I got the text of the sermon, I read it, and in it, the only line that even a little bit referenced Trump said, as Christians, we are called to tear down walls, not build them up. And in larger context, it was talking about that we are, as Christians are kind of called to go to people with open arms, not turn people away. So this entire thing, this entire exchange was because of the way that CNN chose to report on the words in a sermon that didn't even say what they claimed it said. So I really encourage you guys to be careful with how you consume political information. The book does a great job of talking about this too. But look for multiple sources. Try and consider what are the motivations of the people who are giving you this particular piece of information. And again, last part of this before we move on, I testified for a House bill that was in committee on Monday. It's an interesting piece of legislation that would allow driverless taxis to operate in the state of Missouri. It's a company called Waymo, if you guys have heard of it. And basically, when you testify, and anybody can do this, we'll talk about how you guys can get involved in government later on in the semester, but anybody can go to the Capitol if you see legislation that is important to you and fill out a little sheet and sit down and say your piece. And they have to listen to you. That's part of how our government works. When I was there were lots of people who were testifying in favor of this, talking about things like, it's going to be good for the economy. It's going to be great for people with disabilities because they're going to have another form of transportation. The Waymo's not going to discriminate against people who are deaf because they're not able to communicate the same way, or people who have seeing eye dogs because they have a dog. So when we were there, there's these people saying things like that. There's also people who are bringing up statistics like, well, but there's 75,000 accidents or insert number. I completely made that up. Nobody said that. But everybody who was there kind of had their angle, and they were trying to convince the legislators to go their way. Some of the statistics are accurate, some of them are completely false. Mark Twain is one of my favorite authors, and it's because he had a way of saying things that still really resonates today. What my absolute favorite is politicians in diapers should be changed often for the same reason. But one of my second favorites, and the one that's applicable here, is that there are 3 types of untruths in this world. There are lies, there are damn lies, and there's statistics. So when we do statistics, we try to do our best to present an accurate representation of what the data actually show. But you can also really cook the books if you want to. So when we're engaging in this, when you're talking about political ideas, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong because you bring up some statistic that isn't 100% accurate, but I advise you to just exercise caution, because if it were me, I'd want to make sure that the person I backed or the idea that I espoused was based on the best available information. All right, that's enough of that. And now my notes moved on me, so 2 seconds. All right, any questions about consuming political data or the 3 different areas of controversy? There's probably more when we think about them. But now I want to kind of shift gears and talk about the 3 different areas we can think about for how democracy actually works. And these are going to be preferences, institutions, and outcomes. So we talked about those different areas of disagreement. We talked about how people can have different ideas on the same thing, and that's okay. These are going to be the preferences. They're going to be what people want. So for example, maybe you're sitting here and you think to yourself, man, I really wish college were free. But in about 5-6 years, when you're in the workforce and people are taxing you, maybe you're thinking to yourself, man, I really wish taxes were lower. If taxes were lower, then I would have more money in my pocket and I'd be happier, right? Well, those are different competing ideas. Both of them are valid. College being free would be awesome. Us not having to pay for it would be awesome. But because of that scarcity that we talked about last time, both things can't be true. So how do we decide which one of those ideas is superior? How do we get that balance? How do we figure out what restaurant we're going to go to with that group of friends? This is where those institutions come into play. These are going to be the rules of the game. It's going to be how we actually take this concept from here's this disagreement or here's what we want to do to here's how we're going to implement it, here's how we're going to make it work for everybody. And when we talk about that product, what comes out of the institutions is going to be the outcomes. So the outcomes is what actually happens. So preferences, institutions, and outcomes. Layers.
CDC.
Yes.
CDC is one, yeah. Anything else?
I mean, there's personal choice. I mean,
Yeah, there's the personal choice. There's the business considerations too.
businesses required.
And then there's also the preferences of like insurance companies and the medical profession. So what are the preferences that are involved here? What are things that you guys heard at that time about people who are for the mask mandate and against the mask mandate?
Like sort of like anti-vaccine.
Yeah, so yeah, like what's if you could put that in a sentence, what would somebody say to you who didn't want to wear a mask? Along those lines.
These masks are stupid. That COVID's fake. So,
Yeah, we don't know that this is actually even real, right? What are some other preferences that we heard?
It's hot, I can't breathe.
Yeah, it's hot, I can't breathe.
How long is this gonna be?
I want to get back to normal. I heard some people who are like, everybody just needs to get it so we can develop herd immunity and get over it.
Send it straight to the old folks' home. See how that goes.
Yeah, exactly. On the flip side, what are the arguments for it?
Well, I don't want to die.
Yeah, that's the easy one, right? That's the low-hanging fruit. But let's dig a little deeper too.
Other foreign countries, especially ones in Asia, have used them for way longer than we have, including like in medical professions and everyday stuff. They just kind of genuinely help with sanitization and goals.
There's also the economic component. If we have a whole bunch of people dying, it's going to be a drain on our economy. If we have a whole bunch of people who can't go to work because they have COVID, it's going to negatively impact businesses. On the flip side, if we have a whole bunch of people who have to like work from home and things like that because of COVID, now businesses are going to have to invest in new technologies and things. The other one that comes to mind is the strain on our healthcare system. If we have a whole bunch of people who are getting sick, we're going to use up all the bed space. We're going to use up all of our medical personnel so that if somebody like has a heart attack, they can't come into the hospital because there's no space in the inn. So yeah, you guys identified a whole bunch of different preferences here. So what are the institutions that are involved in policy here? The rules of the people who make the choices. And we identified some of them. We talked about like the CDC. But I'll tell you, the CDC kind of like issued guidelines. They didn't really have the power to say nationally you have to do X. They did it in federal buildings, but not
I
like
think
here in the
people,
county.
generally-
I'm sorry.
I mean, yeah, it's in general. If you walk out the house.
I'm more talking about, yes, we did have to wear masks, but it wasn't a like law that came from the CDC, is what I'm saying. So I'm trying to dig a little deeper and see the other players that are involved, the other institutional players that are involved. What did you say?
I think mostly people, the individual.
The individual, yeah. There's
Because
that.
if someone don't want to wear masks, they're not going to wear masks.
There is that component that we talked about last time, where to some extent the social norms should get people to do what they should do. I'll tell you guys, a lot of the mask mandates and everything came down to the state or local level. So the federal government issued guidelines and everything, but they were reluctant to actually do like a nationwide mandate. Something that I think was, if we talk about like herd immunity and stuff, I think that a nationwide mandate maybe would have fixed things faster. But let's step beyond that and then look at like here where the decision was actually made. So you had some states like Massachusetts that as a state said mask mandate across the board. And then you had places like Missouri where it was kind of up to more local governments. So when we had a mask mandate in Cole County, that was because the Cole County Health Department, which, by the way, if you guys don't know, Cole County is the county that we're in right now. But when we had a mask mandate in Cole County, it was because our health department issued that requirement. And then also within the state of Missouri, you had cities. So even more local than a county issuing mask mandates. So for example, in St. Louis County, Crestwood City might have had a mask mandate, whereas the county didn't. I think they both did at the same time, but my point is that the control gets pretty granular at that level. So those are the institutions. And with that, what outcome do you guys think is like, well, we kind of saw what happened. The outcomes that we get is kind of this patchwork of mask mandates. If you're in one place, you've got to wear a mask. If you're in another place, not so much. Why do you think that is? What do you think the major predictor of where the mask mandates was?
Probably the politics of whoever has the establishment.
Exactly. So the politics of the institution definitely governs where we're going to see the mask mandates, where we're not going to see the mask mandates.
I feel like some of the companies or places that did have the mask mandates wouldn't want to fall back on their company if a lot of people started getting sick. So
Yeah.
I think that's why a good amount of school boards started enforcing those mask mandates for all their schools in their district, just so they wouldn't receive any fallback. So they just put out the mandate so everybody wear masks so they could just avoid that.
Absolutely. There's definitely that liability component there. But then on the flip side, there's places that didn't want the fallback. And how many people grew up here in Jefferson City? Raise your hands. No, nobody? Where are you guys all from? Kansas City, St. Louis,
I'm from California, I'm saying.
California,
Grew up in Wyoming.
Wyoming? Why? All right, from Wyoming to central Missouri, why?
They cut a lot of the mental health jobs, and my mom is a peer specialist, so no job, had to move.
Okay. Well, welcome to Missouri. It's not as beautiful as Wyoming. St. Louis and Kansas City I'm very familiar with. I lived in Kansas City for like a decade in undergrad and law school. St. Louis I grew up in. I think one of the major things is I didn't see this as much when I would travel to St. Louis and Kansas City, but here in Jefferson City, there were a lot of businesses that didn't want the fallback from people who disliked the mask mandate. because in this class, the term political has a meaning that basically is, how we get to the solution on that problem. But in the broader context, politicizing an idea means that we have kind of polarized it. We have made it about us versus them. It creates that team sport thing. And the mask mandate here was a team sport. It was like, well, why are you wearing that mask? Don't you know COVID's a hoax kind of thing. There were lots of people, intelligent people who I consider friends that would be mad at me if I weren't to have walked in wearing a mask. So I think that was definitely a strange dynamic as well. All right. So we're actually out of time, so we might do this next class. But we have covered pretty much everything from a lecture standpoint I want to cover. I want to, really quick as you're packing up, I want to remind you guys to read chapter 1. Everybody should have access to that. If you don't, come talk to me. I need you to do your, I'm calling it the values assessment, but it's like an ideology quiz. And it kind of sees where you land on the political spectrum. And then write your reflection about that. Other than that, I'll see you Friday. Remember, Monday we don't have class. So it's going to be a long weekend. But all your work is going to be due on Sunday, just to give you a little bit of extra time. Any questions before I let you go?
How long is the reflection supposed to be?
About 200 to 300 words. And I do words because everybody's concept of a paragraph is different. You can change like the font size to make your pages longer, but 200 to 300 words is about what I'm looking for.
I'm one of those people that like writes really long sentences.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like they just have a bunch of commas and they go on forever. I don't know why I do that.
It's all right with me.
The endless sentence.
It becomes a